Hello and welcome to our next segment of Heathenism 101. I am Elder Godai Asgarod Skegg, and in today's segment of class we are going to be talking about altars, blots, and offerings / sacrifices. So let's go ahead and start with blots. Now, unlike a lot of other faiths out there, any one of you can perform blot. Now, those of us who are trained Godai, and that is our vocation, obviously our blots are going to look a little bit different than, say, the individuals. Ours are probably going to be a little bit more elaborate in nature, a whole lot more pomp and circumstance kind of bit there. But any and every single one of you can perform blot. And the thing about blot for us is blot is not always the regimented, organized ritual that you're going to find in a lot of other pagan variants. And the reasons for this is because the heathen faith, the spirituality and the power of the spirituality originates within the individual. Now, we have certain things that help us to better connect and better align with the gods and with the spirits and with the powers. We find these connections in nature. We find them in the oceans and in the lakes and the waters and the streams. Yes, we do get this connection, but ultimately the divine essence is within each and every one of us. So essentially, blot can look like anything from a regimented, structured ritual like you would see in many organized gatherings. Or blot could look something like this. One of my daily routines is as soon as I wake up in the morning, I go to my bathroom, I fill the sink with water, and then I ritualistically wash myself. And I don't have a regimented per se prayer that I say verbatim every morning, but there is a conversation, a dialogue that happens during this process between me and the gods. The first thing I'm doing is I am thanking Odin for his watchful eye over me as I was vulnerable and sleeping. I thank him for the restfulness and the strength and rejuvenation that I have from my sleep. I reaffirm my vows that, I will spend today honorably. I will speak true words. I will be just. I will be kind. I will be all of these things that it is that means to be heathen. And then I simply ask and remind him that I am only a man and I can only do so much. So where there's needed and warranted help, I ask him for that divine intervention. And in communicating the faith to other people, I do rely on the gods heavily to help give me the strength and the power so that others may feel. And when I'm doing regimented, formalized blots, that's one of my primary goals of the blot is I don't want the people there to just see it and hear it. I want you to feel it. I want the hair on your arms and the back of your necks to stand up. I want you to feel this heavy, enriching presence and then just instantly know that it is the gods and they are standing with us, and that you may not be able to see them with human eyes, but that they are there. So blot is about experience. Really, at its core, it's about experience. And it's about experiencing the divine. So you don't have to have candles and incense and a 50-page long invocation written in Old Norse. You don't need all of that to connect with the gods. Simply sitting out in a meadow, an open meadow. It's quiet. You're listening to the wind blowing through the trees around you, and you're just quiet. And then you feel something. That's the gods. They're there. And you've performed a ritual to talk and to communicate with them, and you didn't need all of the grand accommodations and the altars and all of that. So blot is pretty much whatever you need it to look like. Now, your structured and regimented blots, like I do during festivals, they do have a very clear outline, I'm going to say, because I also, when it comes to blots, I don't use anybody else's work. I don't take outlines from anyone else when it comes to my normal blots. Now, I have an extremely long hand fasting ritual that I did pull from a couple of different sources, and I actually pulled it from a couple of different sources and made it into a model that I like. But that's probably one of the only occasions where I use an actual outline for blots. But to sum it down, blots do have three primary parts: beginning, middle, and end. Your beginning portion is where you're going to be charging the ritual space, you're going to be consecrating it, and you're going to be summoning down the gods that you wish to summon down for that particular blot. Now, in general, as a rule, blot is always done to one god and one god only. However, if the need arises, you can extend it out, because again, our faith doesn't require those rigid guidelines and those regimented steps in blot unless you belong to probably the Asatru or the foreign cedar side of the groupings. But you won't find that regimented, hard structured of a ritual outline. You're not going to find that in heathenism, because the ritual is more about emotional response than it is about an actual outline. So in the beginning, you're charging your space, you're getting it ready, and then there's the middle. Then that part is generally where you bring the actual gods down into the ritual space, and this is also the part where you would generally bless the participants who are witnessing the blot for the festival that you're presiding over, if you were an actual Gothai or high priest. And then there's the ending. You thank the gods for coming down, you thank them for their blessings, you thank them for their strength and their wisdom and for being there, and then you release from blot to continue on with the festival celebrations. So all in all, that's blots. Now, altars, much like blots, there's really no regimented outline. There's no right or wrong items to go on your particular altar. If it's a personal altar for at home, the altar is really a reflection of your own individual spirituality. Mine carries a lot of god totems on my private altar. I have several offering bowls, which are for several different purposes. I have some animal pelts on there. I have some bone work on there. I have some bird feathers on there. My altar would look very, very much like something you would find back in the ancestral days. Most of my god totems or my statues, they're also made out of wood. I have one statue that is of metal, and I actually kind of think there's a specific reason why his is different from everybody else's, and that is Heimdall. And that is because Heimdall is not of the Aesir. He's classified as Vanir, but he's not even really Vanir, because he was born from the sacred fire of the Grotai Mill. So the Heimdall statue on my personal altar is different, and it's the only one made out of metal on my altar. So there's no right or wrong. You know, they can be any size, they can be any shapes, as long as you get a psychic and spiritual connection to that deity looking at that particular idol. Now, you could put, again, just about anything on your altar, and again, your altar is going to be a personal reflection of your own individual spirituality. Now, a altar that, say, a Gothai would put together for a festival celebration is going to be a much more organized one. They're probably going to have some candles burning. They're probably going to have some incense going. I actually have a small cauldron that I actually burn. I burn sage in, and I have an actual full going flame on the center of my altar. But again, that's not something I do in my personal life. I do it in public, and it's exclusively to get the reaction, the pump out of the ritual. Because when you're performing ritual for a group of people, it's just as much about what you're doing and the words that you're saying as how you're feeling. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, my blots, they're very, very impromptu. And it's based on how the gods are making me feel in that particular moment of the ritual. So I shift what I do. Sometimes I tell short stories. Sometimes I sing. You know, it all depends on how the gods are motivating me in that particular moment. So when you build your altar, if you're thinking it's not right, then that means you've got something there that doesn't individually align with you and your spirituality. So anytime you walk up to your altar, you should have feelings of strength, feelings of connection, feelings of clarity. And you also want to make sure that after you've got your altar space, you want to bless it. I find generally the easiest way to hold true to heathen values is to use salt water to do all of your blessing. You can forget the sage, you can forget the other incenses and all of that. Salt and water is one of the most basic ways of consecration and purifying within the Norse practice. So we've gone over blots, we've gone over altars, and now, and this is a very, very popularly asked question of mine, and that has to do with offerings and sacrifices. Offerings and sacrifices are very, very different. They're very different things, and they're very specific to certain needs. They're not general all in all, especially when you're talking about sacrifice. Your offerings are going to be things that you dedicate to that ritual, that blot, that conversation that are natural. Water, salt, mead, wheat grains, stuff like that. They're going to be considered as offerings. And offerings are considered on the power oomph level. Offerings are considered to be on the low end of what you do in the process. But offerings are also very easy within the Norse faith to do, because again, we don't require all of those special items and materials and such forth like that. You know, if all you have that day is a glass of water to offer the gods, you take a sip of that water to bring the life-giving water into you, and then you pour the rest of it out onto the grass. And then you're contributing to the growth of the natural world. So don't think that, and don't get hung up on the idea that when it comes to offerings, it has to be ale, it has to be mead. You don't have to do that. Because even Odin says in the Havamal that it is better to offer less and have the appropriate offering for what you're needing or wanting than to offer too little and you're using an atomic bomb to swat a fly, basically. So your offerings and your sacrifices, they need to be proportionate for what you've got going on and what you're doing. Sacrifices are completely different because there you are taking the life of an animal. The animal was alive at the beginning of the ceremony, and the animal was ritualistically killed during the offering, during the ritual portion of the gathering. Now, I do not condone normal, everyday practitioners in sacrifices, because there are actually laws out there, and these laws protect our practice when it comes to animal sacrifices. Now, one of the things that has evolved from the ancient days is we no longer sacrifice human beings like they used to do in the ancient days. So our sacrifices now are exclusively going to be animals. And I have personally presided over a few animal sacrifices, and one of them was to bless the vows and the oaths of a new Godai. So, but there are laws out there, and in order to do the sacrifice, you first have to be aware legislatively of what your protections are. Because our right to spiritual practice is protected to us under the Constitution, and that includes the right to be able to do and conduct animal sacrifices in a spiritual setting. And I emphasize spiritual setting only. Now, there are laws, and most of these laws are to ensure that the animal that is being killed in as humanely a manner as humanly possible. This law and the way this law is structured is in keeping with our own individual values on honoring and respecting the sacrifice. So for the days leading up to a sacrifice, we're just going to say it's a cow in this particular sacrifice. The days leading up to the sacrifice, the animal would be washed in milk. It would be given its most choice and favorite foods. And it would basically be treated like royalty for the days leading up to the sacrifice. The day of the sacrifice, the animal is again then washed, and it's fed very, very well. And then when the actual sacrifice takes place, the high priest or Gothai that's performing the sacrifice, the first responsible thing that they can do in that blot is have the right knife. I have a knife that is exclusively used for animal sacrifices, and it is a butcher's grade knife. So in the times where I performed live sacrifices, when I made my single and only cut that was ever needed, the knife cut 3/4 of the way through the neck. So both major blood systems that go up to the head, covered. The vocal cords, to keep it from crying out, that's covered. And because it's such a deep and such a heavy and fast cut, that animal literally bleeds out and goes into exsanguination shock before it even realizes what's going on. So 1 minute the animal's okay, and the next minute, boom, they're just blacked out, and they've exsanguinated now to the point that they're dead. So ensuring that it's done right and done appropriately is not only, we do this for the sake of the animals, but we do it to give honor to our practice as well. So again, I do not recommend, or I do not condone live sacrifices among general practitioners. Because if you're needing an animal sacrifice for something, like one of the common uses of an animal sacrifice during a festival event is for the blessing and the purification purposes of it, but it's also to feed the community that's there. So when they kill the pig, that pig goes on the spit with an apple in its mouth the next day, and it's dinner for everybody the next day. So we also take that the meat of the sacrifice and the nourishment of the blessing, we also take that into us. And just to ensure that it's properly done, it really needs to be done by a Gothai. So that covers our blots, altars, and offerings and sacrifices segment. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and this is actually the last segment of the normal regimented class that I had created. So for a little bit, this is going to be the last session. However, I am making plans currently on several other reading and several other educational block segments that we're going to be hosting here on the Alliance YouTube page. So please keep your eyes out for new content. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to not only support the Alliance, but so us who are contributors to the channel can make sure that we're getting the content out to you guys. All right, so thank you very much for sitting in on these video segments. I hope everything was educational. Any questions, please, as always, throw them in the comments section of the specific video you're watching. And until next time, walk always with the gods.